Welcome to the day. US President Joe Biden's facing mounting political pressure over a shortage of baby formula. The supply chain disruption began when the largest formula manufacturing plant in the US had to close because of safety concerns. Now the president has invoked the Defense Production Act to revive domestic supplies and to allay the fears of worried parents.
While Americans got used to certain products missing from supermarket shelves during the pandemic, the shortage of this product could potentially be life-threatening: baby formula. A nightmare especially for mothers who are unable to breastfeed.
Blake Jr. And I started to see that there was a formula shortage. So I was telling my husband, I said, honey, we got to go and find this formula because this is a crisis. He said, oh, everything's going to be all right, you know? All of a sudden, we go to buy formula, everything is gone.
It all started in February when top US manufacturer Abbott Laboratories had to close their plant in Michigan after recalling formulas. Babies became sick with bacterial infections after consuming the products. At least 2 infants died. To battle the shortage, US President Joe Biden invoked the Defense Production Act. It requires suppliers of formula manufacturers to fulfill their orders before delivering to other customers. He also authorized special flights to import supplies from overseas.
I've directed the Department of Defense and the Department of Health and Human Services to send aircraft, planes overseas to pick up infant formula that meets U.S. health and safety standards so we can get it on the store shelves faster.
The shortage has sparked a surge of interest at milk banks. Mothers are increasingly coming here to feed their children with donated milk from other women.
We were able to come here and get as many bottles as we needed to keep her fed and keep her growing. This past week when we called, there just wasn't any available. So it's been pretty scary to realize that you might not be able to feed your baby, right? So.
It's a public health crisis that could easily turn into a political crisis for the Biden administration. The US president will be hoping his executive action will end the shortage and prevent further political fallout.
Let's start on that question with Amber Phillips, who's been covering this story for the Washington Post. Welcome to DW. How is this playing politically for the president?
Yeah, well, there was just a hearing today where the head of the agency that's supposed to be monitoring baby formula and inspecting that plant in Michigan that had those potential safety bacterial infection problems, told Congress, we're investigating, we're working on this every day. But that person was blasted by both members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, saying, you had a whistleblower report about this from October. At least one member of Congress said, I told you about an infant death in my community in September. And yet the FDA didn't jump in to try to investigate this plant until December. In between that time, infants were hospitalized and died, and this has all exacerbated the shortage of infant formula. So the point I'm trying to make here is that this government agency here in America has some tough questions to answer about why they didn't act sooner on this, and why they didn't foresee a crisis coming if this major plant in America, a major manufacturer, had to pull formula from the shelves. So the Biden administration more broadly has yet to answer questions about that. I think right now they're just focused in crisis mode, arguably months later.
And are all mothers in the same boat on this, or are there geographical or social differences?
Yes and no to both those questions. All mothers are in their same boat. It is very difficult, no matter your socioeconomic level, to find formula. However, there have been researchers who say it's more difficult for lower income women, and that's because a lot of them rely on coupons from the government to buy formula, and they can only buy specific formula. So Congress today just passed a bill that will change that and allow them to buy whatever they see on the shelves. Rural areas, you also have reports of mothers driving hundreds of miles to a food bank where they hear that there's formula. And then it also affects women who don't have time, resources, or childcare to take off to go to 8 different Target big box stores here in America to find formula.
And you hinted at the sort of the crux of this problem. It does seem odd that the closure of one factory can cause all this disruption.
Yeah, there are 4 major formula manufacturers in the US. The United States does not, if ever, import formula, although that's changing now with this crisis as the military actually rushes to try to get formula from abroad over here to the US. And in addition, as I said, low-income women in particular have to buy a certain formula and the government restricts them, and there's no flexibility in times of crisis or natural disaster or supply chain issues. And so these are all very systemic problems that I think the broader community here in America didn't think about until all of a sudden you heard the pain in that mother's voice. Moms can't feed their babies, or they're scared they can't.
Yeah. And doctors, of course, are warning against making up your own baby formula, these so-called home brews.
Yeah. My kids are just out of the formula stage, but I know from my mom community here where I live in America that when you call your pediatrician and say, what do I do? There are no other options other than to go to the store and look for formula and deal with the rations and deal with the lines and deal with the time off work. There are no other options. As you just said, doctors say, don't make your own formula. Don't wean your child off this before they're 1. Don't try giving them cow's milk alone. Figure out a way to get formula.
And it's like it's one thing after another. There's with COVID, and we have the cost of living crisis, inflation close to a 40-year high, and people struggling to afford food, shelter, and even fuel.
It's not a good look for Democrats if we're going to talk about this politically. And of course, President Biden and his party are trying to keep control of Congress and whatever governor's mansions and legislatures they still have control of in November's midterm elections. It is not a good look when Republicans can say, look, in America in 2022, where's the baby formula? Especially when it points, the timeline as we know right now, and it's still early in the story, points to the administration not responding quickly enough to this crisis or foreseeing it at the very least.
So briefly then, the Abbott factory has now been cleared to restart, and between that and the president's crisis measures, when is it predicted that baby formula will be back on the shelves?
We're hearing a broad range, which is frustrating for moms and dads trying to find formula. It could be weeks to even months. Right. The head of this agency, the FDA, told Congress that the really hard part is going to be distributing formula to rural areas in particular. So those people who really need it could be the last to get it.
All right. We wish you well. Thank you so much for joining us and explaining that to us. Amber Phillips from The Washington Post.
Thank you.